Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's topic. We are charting a fascinating course through history, tracing the telephone's dramatic journey from a wire-bound novelty that people genuinely scoffed at to a pocket-sized global overlord that literally dictates how we live, work, and connect. It's just an incredible story of wild innovation, fierce competition, and massive societal shifts.
Okay, let's dive into this. Back in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell offered to sell his telephone patent to Western Union for a mere $100,000. The committee's response? Absolutely brutal. They literally called the idea idiotic and completely dismissed his ungainly, impractical device as hardly more than a toy. I mean, it has to be one of the most famously short-sighted business decisions in human history. To them, the telegraph was perfectly fine. Why on earth would anyone want to hear a voice when you could just have a clear, written message delivered? The irony is just staggering when you consider what happens next.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the transition from toy to tool. Then we'll check out the era of corporate consolidation in the age of Ma Bell. Third, we'll see how we finally cut the cord. Fourth, we're exploring the digital text revolution. And finally, we'll arrive at total global domination.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, From Toy to Tool.
To really understand the telephone's origins, we have to remember the world it was born into. Samuel Morse's telegraph network had totally redefined statecraft and commerce. It was the undisputed king of instant, long-distance communication. But transmitting a real-time human voice, that was a completely different beast. And trying to bring that beast to life triggered one of the fiercest races in all of technological history. Now, innovators like the Italian Antonio Meucci and Frenchman Charles Bersoul had devised basic phone concepts years earlier, but 1876 was the defining moment. Alexander Graham Bell filed his master patent for the electromagnetic telephone literally just hours before his rival, Elisha Gray, submitted a very similar design. Talk about a nail-biter, right? Bell had the financial backers, a solid business plan, and impeccable legal timing. So he won the race, and shortly after transmitted that famous first speech by electricity to his assistant, Thomas Watson.
It's totally fascinating to see how society reacted once the telephone started hitting the market. People raved and ranted about what it would do to humanity. We saw wild predictions that it would foster world peace, increase crime, decentralize cities, and absolutely ruin the art of writing. Does any of that sound familiar? These 19th century anxieties perfectly mirror our modern arguments about the internet. We just always seem to project both utopian dreams and apocalyptic fears onto our new communication tools.
Moving right along to Section 2, the age of Ma Bell.
As the telephone shifted from a quirky novelty to an indispensable tool, the industry rapidly transformed. It went from a scattered mess of local lines to a massive, consolidated empire under AT&T. By 1907, AT&T had essentially established a monopoly. Its president, Theodore Vail, actually made the argument that a single unified monopoly was the most efficient way to run a national communications network. But, as you might guess, the public and smaller competitors pushed back hard. This tension led directly to the 1913 Kingsbury Commitment. Basically, to avoid government antitrust violations, AT&T agreed to divest itself of Western Union, which is hilarious since Western Union was the very company that had once called the phone a toy, and they agreed to connect independent local exchanges to their long-distance network. This massive compromise stabilized the wireline industry under a heavily regulated, yet still incredibly powerful monopoly.
But let's zoom in and look at how innovation was happening at the local level, sometimes driven by pure, unadulterated spite. In the early days, if you wanted to make a call, a human switchboard operator had to physically connect your line. Well, enter Almon Strowger, a Kansas City funeral director in the late 1880s. Strowger suspected that a manual operator who just happened to be married to his main competitor was purposely diverting all of his incoming business calls to her husband. So what was his solution? He just bypassed the operator entirely by inventing the automatic electromechanical exchange in 1889. That's right, the automatic switchboard was essentially born out of local funeral parlor espionage.
This early era really builds our understanding of privacy, too, because the telephone has always been a double-edged sword. Back in the 1800s, you dealt with shared party lines where multiple families used the exact same connection. That meant eavesdropping neighbors and nosy operators were a constant, everyday threat. Today, well, the technology has changed, but that dynamic hasn't. We now face sophisticated wiretapping and endless telemarketer spam. The phone gave us the ultimate convenience of private, real-time conversation right from our living rooms, but it's simultaneously opened up a massive new backdoor for surveillance and intrusion.
Which brings us to our third section, cutting the cord.
The monumental leap from buried wires to the absolute freedom of wireless communication didn't just happen overnight. Actually, what's kind of spooky is that way back in 1891, AT&T's chief engineer John J. Carty eerily predicted a system of telephony without wires where distance would only be limited by the curvature of the Earth. He saw it coming a full century before it became our reality. Let's just quickly walk through this progression. In 1946, we had the zero-generation mobile telephone service. These were massive, heavy transceivers mostly used in vehicles. Then, a huge breakthrough happened on April 3, 1973, when Motorola's Martin Cooper made the first call from a handheld mobile prototype right on the streets of New York. Fast forward to 1981, the Nordic countries launched the 1G NMT standard, which introduced international roaming. And then in 1983, the 1G analog cellular network, known as AMPS, finally launched commercially in the United States.
And the absolute legend of a device that launched alongside that 1983 US network was the Motorola Dynatac 8000X, affectionately known by everyone as the Brick. It was incredibly expensive, it was super heavy, and honestly, the battery life was terrible by today's standards. But its significance just cannot be overstated. This was the device that finally truly unshackled everyday users from physical wires, allowing them to literally carry a communication network around in their hands.
That newfound analog freedom leads us perfectly into Section 4, the digital text revolution.
In the early 1990s, those analog 1G systems were rapidly replaced by 2G digital networks like GSM. This shift offered much higher capacity, built-in encryption, and a brand new feature that would fundamentally change human communication forever. On December 3, 1992, an engineer named Neil Papworth sat down at a computer and sent the world's very first text message to a mobile phone. It simply read, "Merry Christmas." Just 1 year later, Nokia introduced an SMS feature with that distinctive beep to signal an incoming message, a sound that would soon be echoing through literally every public space on Earth.
So the crucial point is this number 160. That was the strict character limit for early text messages. And because users had to cram their thoughts into this tiny little box, an entirely new language was born. People invented text-speak to save precious space, acronyms like LOL became totally mainstream, and users started combining keyboard characters to create early emoticons to show emotion, which of course are the direct ancestors of the emojis we use all day long today. It's amazing how a technical limitation actually forced a massive cultural innovation.
And that brings us to our final section, total global domination. Entering the 21st century, the telephone morphed from a device used simply to talk into a multi-purpose pocket computer that connects us to the internet, our banks, our cameras, and each other all simultaneously. To really grasp the scale of this domination, just consider this. Today, the number of active cellular subscriptions worldwide actually outnumbers the entire global human population. Let that sink in. There are more active phones out there than there are people. Compare that staggering reality directly with President Rutherford B. Hayes' quote from 1876 upon seeing the very first telephone. He asked, "Who would ever want to use one of them?" Well, Mr. President, the answer turned out to be absolutely everybody.
A massive driver of this global ubiquity is a really cool phenomenon known as leapfrogging. In many parts of the developing world, building a traditional telephone network meant burying thousands and thousands of miles of expensive copper wire, which was a huge infrastructural barrier. Mobile technology allowed these nations to leapfrog over the wireline era entirely. They just adopted modern cellular networks directly, bringing millions of people into the global digital economy almost overnight.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we mean. When we look at telecom adoption in places like Ghana or Nigeria, traditional landline subscriptions remained almost non-existent throughout the years. But mobile phone subscriptions? Explosively high. These countries didn't transition slowly. They essentially skipped a whole century of telecom history and zoomed straight into the wireless future.
From a toy completely dismissed by Western Union to a multi-purpose device that literally outnumbers humans on Earth, the telephone's rise to power has been absolute. But of course, with widespread use comes deep social impacts. Very real concerns over things like social isolation, job stress, and a breakdown of public etiquette. The telephone conquered physical wires, it conquered vast geographical distance, and it has successfully conquered the entire globe. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. As this technology integrates even deeper into our everyday lives, what aspect of our humanity will it conquer next? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.